So where would you say the biggest, where would you like to spend the most money as far, or fund, the biggest area of funding for if you were elected into that seat? Where would you like to see the most amount of money funneled in any particular issue? I guess where would your funding priorities lie if you were to?
In social services, or do you in social services generally?
Well, yeah. So like just in general, whether would you want the majority of funding or your funding priorities to go towards crime or social service, or like what issue I guess would your funding priorities lie?
Oh, well, okay. Again, it's a matter of recognizing what the general issues are. You can start with the observation that we have a school to jail pipeline, and remember what people try to tell us about that. If you spend money earlier in the schools, you can measure there are going to be fewer people going to jail 10, 15 years down the line. Okay, so I mean, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to be going through a list of all the things I should have already memorized as a policy prescription, when actually my campaign is about trying to remember the basic principles of representative democracy and living in a republic, and that does include the humility to accept there are experts who know things I don't, that I go ask questions about, right? It's always better to spend money earlier in a causal chain to stop the ill consequence. But I have no specifics on that either. One thing a couple of different interesting people pointed out to me, and this came from my questions when I ran for school board a bunch of years ago, and one of the principals told me that he'd been collecting data for a long time that showed if kids stayed in his school, they always did better than the kids who came and went, right? The kids who would show up, be there 2 years, and they'd be gone. And this led into an observation that some people would say, when the school district redraws lines, well, new kids to a district, they got to go to the new school. But if you're in a school, maybe you just should stay there. Some people say, well, that might lead to a circumstance where a school becomes more segregated, right? As neighborhoods may change, a school like Benton may become less mixed. Some people say, is that necessarily the bad thing if that addresses the needs of those kids in that neighborhood? There's a whole lot of nuance that I have picked up on in conversations with people when it comes to local control that people in Jefferson City have no clue about, I think. I think they're pandering to the people that will give them money, and those are the charter school lobbyists, okay? But when you have a conversation with the locals, it's more like one John Potter and I had. I don't know that if you went to him and said, could you have the kind of organization of schools that would give more ridgeways, would you really need to have charter schools, get private persons? I don't know that he'd have to have that.
So I guess you would say, going back, I guess, to the initial question, would you say like then education would be something that you would like want one of your priorities to be like spending wise, or is it more of like wait and? I don't
know that I'm being somehow. I think I'm being more specific. This is from John Martin's perma thing. Got in my mail. Who can disagree with supporting Mizzou and quality education? What does that mean? Okay, and so okay, reading and writing and arithmetic. But how about some history? Quit making all this noise, about DEI and CRT propaganda. I mean, is that quality education code for can't have any knowledge of Jim Crow and the history of slavery? What is that? So, yeah, poverty gives people problems that they carry for a long time, maybe forever. And given that you can correlate some criminality to some level of poverty and the schools that are available to poor neighborhoods and poor communities, spend some money in the schools. That doesn't solve every problem. That doesn't explain why people wind up living on the street. You can be someone who actually, the number of reasons people fall out into the street. I once had a job that did include occasionally shoveling human feces up out of an alley. It was part. So it's not like I'm oblivious to what the homeless cause in the community. But you've got to be able to take the resources to find out what people need, and you're almost asking me like, what about that person that was sleeping outside the Boone County office the other day? The funny thing about it was she was passed out next to the collection box for the property tax returns or something like that. And isn't this funny? The tax box next to the homeless person sleeping on the street. Yeah, well, I don't know really what's funny about that. And since I don't know that person's circumstances and I'm not a trained professional, I can't tell you what to do for that person. I can just say, again, you can spend money to help them or not. You can spend money to address problems in the schools or not. That'll address some of the criminality. And maybe there just are some people who are antisocial. We'll never figure that out. Maybe there always will be some people who have to be locked up. Again, reference to the numbers I saw about incarcerations in the United States being 3-4 times what they are in some European countries. I guess that data would prove there are some people who will always have to be restrained. They are a threat to others. Okay. Unfortunately, I guess I'd have to spend money for that too.
So I guess you wouldn't have necessarily like a priority area on your campaign. It would just be more of like, hey, we got to address the issues as they come type.
It's more important that I make the point we have to quit cutting taxes, quit cutting corporate taxes, which we did again, and throwing the burden on sales tax. It's more important I get down there and make that point than I make any particular point of where to spend money on these issues. It's more important that I go down there and remind everybody, once upon a time, we passed a constitutional amendment that said, well, we'll spend as much as 5.5% of your income. No more than that, but take 5.5% of your income. And that's what the state of Missouri, will spend for the good of the public, because that's what we were taking at the time. But the data shows we don't tax ourselves as much as we used to, regardless. The propagandists will tell you, we're overtaxed. Well, the tax distributions and burdens are different. But we are richer than we were when Hancock was passed, and we don't tax ourselves as heavily as we did back then. All right. That I will stand on the floor and talk about, until I fall down. I'm not going to stand on the floor and talk about we need to spend exactly this amount of money on this specific prison program. I'm not. Yeah, that's not what I can do.
You did mention the homeless issue. It does seem like the price of housing has increased and the amount of houses available has decreased. Is there any plans you have or anything you would like to see done to address that homeless issue? Or I guess what would be the ideal approach moving forward on how to handle that?
Well, I went to a couple of the different housing hearings that Boone County Commission was having on their housing planning. The hearings they had where they came up with the conclusion, need to add something like 37,000 houses to Boone County and by 2050 or something like that. So I've been listening. And so what does people say? Well, of course, we have to build more houses so there's a greater supply. Well, what do we need to build more houses? People say it's actually a shortage of labor, not a shortage of investment capital. I don't understand exactly why the housing industry did not recover after the bubble that burst. So it's paradoxical. It may indicate that there was just a hesitancy of people to reinvest. Okay, but I also understand supply chains were disrupted. Again, it's a matter of. I know this. I know the general answer is you have to increase the supply of housing. There is some concern about coherency of regulations. At one of these hearings, I learned that a subdivision could not be built where the developers wanted to put it on account of the fact the local water district wouldn't approve the expansion of the water district infrastructure. Sounds like something that could be fixed either at the county or state level. So, although I generally don't like to hear, well, the problem with, a shortage of housing or a shortage of anything is there's too many rules, because I like regulated foods. I like regulated products. I like regulated things coming into my house. I don't like stuff that I cannot presume were responsibly made or produced. Okay. And the same thing about houses or roads or neighborhoods, right? So a coherency of rules is different from, we just need to have fewer rules. I've been, in the course of this, I've been sympathetic to people in Boone County who point out, well, with development comes the infrastructure, and we as landowners, have the easements that get taken up, and the utility companies are not very friendly. I hear some of that. I'd like to help that. Maybe that would make it easier for people to accept housing in their development. I would prefer to follow the strategy that I've heard from the city people, that there's more empty, undeveloped space closer to town than we might realize. It should be infilled. I do question things like, why is that nice array of solar panels on the south side of Highway 7 there, just east of Lake of the Woods Road exit? Because that's the kind of close-in housing place you might want to have, right? And I'm not anti-solar, but even I've wondered when, again, out in the I'm running in the county, and county people, they're used to having big open spaces, and they, may not even be necessarily opposed to solar power in principle, but not quite NIMBY. Convinced me it's a good thing here. Again, a coherency of policies. I don't control inflation, okay? That's very little. I can help people deal with it by not raising their taxes and stopping people who would raise their sales taxes. So I can't control the interest rate. I don't know to what extent low income, interest rate assistance can be delivered to people. So, one of the things I have fun doing is Republicans like to object to what they call environmental, social, and governmental investment strategies. But the state itself turns around and invests, more than $1 billion or so this last round at less than market rates, in banks, in exchange for which these banks make special loans to businesses. I don't oppose that in principle, right? So, but I oppose the double dealing in how you talk about well, it's just wrong not to get every nickel you can get out of investment. If you're not doing that, then you're being irresponsible. There are other things that can be pursued with capital investments, right? So I don't know to what extent similar programs can be developed for housing. There are people who always talk about the inefficiency of the housing credits. Even Greitens, who I didn't agree with much about, well, of every dollar that the state of Missouri was spending to get a house spent, 60 cents went for the actual housing, and 40 cents went to all the middle hands in between. I know there's been some kind of reform process that would let people, discount faster and get their money quicker, which would then let circulate more bonds in the process, right? And I don't know what point that doesn't become some kind of churning for some bond company, right? So those are the kind of piecemeal things you can look at. But I'm running for the House of Representatives to talk about the general rules by which we associate and the general values we are to protect and pursue, and not how I have a plan to get 37,000 houses built in Boone County by 2050. Don't have that particular plan. But I don't doubt that government help is going to be needed. I don't doubt that. And there are people who do.
Shifting gears to immigration, I know that's something that affects a lot of these other states besides just the border states. Governor Parson sent a bunch of troopers down to Texas to help, and you hear a lot of claims that these immigrants are bringing fentanyl over across the border, and that's been a big issue in Missouri. However, after asking him, he didn't really seem to have a direct link. I'm curious what your thoughts on immigration are. If you think it's having a big impact, specifically illegal immigration in Missouri, and how do you think the state should address that, or how would you like to see it addressed?
Again, it's the confliction of the particular stories one hears about particular episodes, which are terrible, and the general trend of things. And so in the context of Dean Plocker's little committee hearing yesterday, where he basically said, well, we really don't know how bad it is, I came across the fact that in 2022, there were 62 homicides in all of America that could be attributed to an illegal, unlawful, undocumented alien in the country. 62 of 21,000 and some murders. So I don't really know that the immigrants are here killing a lot of people, right? Even though you can pick up the paper or look up what's online, and yeah, some poor girl got killed by somebody who was in the country illegally. It's terrible. Is that really what's wrong with America? You listen to the big business community, people, I got to listen to the people who control investments, who decide where money goes. They say problem in Missouri is shortage of labor. And then people at the higher national level say, it's just true that the 10 million people who have showed up here over the last few years they're filling jobs that Americans did not fill. I mean, we'd be worse off without them. Okay, that's what those people have to say. I have to look at the big number picture things and say, it would be better if we didn't have anyone walking around undocumented. It would be better if the border could be fixed. I have no good faith belief that that's what the Republicans want to do, given they sabotaged the Langford bill. So I call bad faith on all of that. The general data is that the overwhelming greatest majority of people who come to America want to have a better life, and they don't want to bring bad attention to themselves. And about the only illegal thing they'll probably ever do their entire life is the one of coming to America.
Finally, is there anything you would like to add that you think would be important for people to know, either by you or the campaign, or just some issue that we didn't touch on that you think would be important?
I just want to say again, I'm astonished that the deniers have taken the Republican field. This is truly overwhelming to me. I am 68. This is frightening.
When you say deniers, you're talking election deniers?
Oh, the election deniers, yeah. The people who have... There is no integrity in the Republican leadership whatsoever. None. The people who have integrity have been driven out. It's shameful that McConnell and Lindsey Graham and everyone have just crumpled up and become rags of moral character. Right. So, I had wanted to put, and it is the first thing on the campaign, lit here, that we're deciding what kind of government we're going to keep this November, right? And to my astonishment, that only does so well in the polls. People still have to deal with the daily grind of life, right? The daily grind of life. And they don't want to hear any, even if it's true, they just don't want to hear the explanation. Inflation was a worldwide thing, right? Joe Biden did not cause all of that. They just don't want to hear it because they're angry. And so then you compound that with, the Republicans, baiting issues that make people feel creepy, like transgender care. nobody's business, and the Republicans use it as a foil to scare people. If anything, the issue is whether or not people are going to be honest, whether they're going to have any integrity. Neither John Martin nor Josh Beal, to my knowledge, have put any distance between themselves and anything Cherie Tolson-Reich ever promoted or defended. As near as I know, they have endorsed every bad policy that she does, and they will compound it. And from what I hear, I got no reason to think they won't. They haven't. It's vacuity. Or I could bring up my cell phone and show you the message I got from Bryce Beal. Christian conservative constitutionalism. I don't know what that means. But we live in a republic. We don't, where Christians are free to have their religion, and Muslims and everybody else. I don't know there's nothing in the Constitution about it being a Christian document. Even the Declaration says that the truths that we ground ourselves upon are self-evident. They're like rules of axiom. Maybe you might think God wrote them. Okay, well, that's your story, how they were there. But reason itself can bring that to me. All right, so I don't need any of that to have a republic, and a Christian republic is a threat to everybody who doesn't agree with the people who decide what a Christian is or what a Christian Republican has to be like. That's a threat to everybody else's religion, everybody else's non-religion.
Well, thank you again for the time. I really appreciate you stopping by.